All right. Good morning. Um, this is actually the third time I've tried to get this stream taken care of, so we'll see if this does it. I'm going to jump right in, try and get this done, and then get it posted to the website so that if people want to view it later, they can. Last we saw Joseph, he was giving his brothers instructions on how to address Pharaoh in this meeting that they were about to have. And now we find in chapter 47, verse 1, that Joseph is going in to Pharaoh and kind of preparing the way. It says, so Joseph went in and told Pharaoh, my father and my brothers with their flocks and herds and all that they possess have come from the land of Canaan. And if you remember, it was Pharaoh who told Joseph to go get them. So now Joseph is going in and saying, okay, they're here. They are now in the land of Goshen. He's placed them there probably in hopes that Pharaoh would say, well, yeah, why don't they just stay there? Pharaoh was, didn't specify where, but he said they'll get the best of the land. So Joseph evidently feels like Goshen is the best that there is to offer. And so, verse 2, and from among his brothers, he took 5 men and presented them to Pharaoh. So now he brings in 5 of his brothers. Why 5? Don't know, but it is 5. And so he brings them in. In verse 3, Pharaoh said to his brothers, what is your occupation? So just like Joseph had said was going to happen, it happens. What's your occupation? And they said to Pharaoh, your servants are shepherds, as our fathers were. So they're right on script. And now they kind of go off script a little bit, but maybe to kind of help their cause in settling in where they already are. They said to Pharaoh, we have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now, please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. So, before we go on, I want to talk about this sojourn because Jews to this day point back to that word and they connect it to chapter 15. And if you've got your Bibles, you might want to go back there, chapter 15, verse 12. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram, and behold, a dreadful and great darkness fell upon him. Then the Lord said to Abram, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. So now, again, the dots are connected. What God not prophesied, but what he determined would happen. I guess when we talk about God, it's not so much of a prophecy, it's not so much as a prediction as much as it is a determination. So as he determined what would happen, it is now happening, and this is coming true. So the Jews look at this and point back to chapter 15, and really it ties then into the law of Moses. And the law of Moses talks about sojourners or immigrants um, in Israel, and the proper treatment of those immigrants or sojourners. And whenever it talks about that in the Mosaic law, it reminds them, it says, because you were once sojourners in the land of Egypt. So remember your affliction, remember what happened to you, and therefore treat others accordingly, treat others better than you were treated, which is really what God is all about, right? Forgive as you've been forgiven. Be gracious as grace has been given to you. There's this love as you have been loved. There's all of these kind of God models for us what we are to extend to others. And so let's see, they now say, hey, let us stay where we are, right? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. So when he says Pharaoh said to Joseph, he probably sent the brothers out. Okay, that was part of the formal greeting. Now he's taking care of business at the royal court, taking care of business. So Joseph stays in. He says, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them settle in the land of Goshen. And if you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock. This is key, and this is will play into what happens next, and that is having put them in charge of the king's livestock or the Pharaoh's livestock gives them protection, gives them government protection, and from what is about to take place. Um, and so they would be automatically cared for because now they're in the service of Pharaoh, and they're going to be taken care of. On a whole different level. It's no longer just out of graciousness for Joseph. It's now Pharaoh is locking himself into the family and is going to provide for them. And so again, you wonder maybe why Pharaoh would do that. Well, look at how much he has been blessed, and Egypt has been blessed because of Joseph. So Pharaoh's got to be thinking there must be something about this family. So if employing one of them is going to be this much of a blessing, what happens if I employ all of them, and what that blessing may bring? And so Pharaoh is thinking probably shrewdly and wants more blessing. Why not? Who wouldn't, right? So that's probably why he's saying put them in charge of my livestock, because with Joseph in charge, so much has been blessed. So why not bank on that further blessing? Then Joseph, verse 7, um, brought in Jacob, his father. Now, this is a little less formal. Jacob comes in probably because of Jacob's age. There's definitely a certain amount of respect, even that a Pharaoh would have for an elderly man. And we're going to find out that Jacob is 130 years old. But Joseph brings Jacob, his father, and stood him before Pharaoh. So he kind of there's this sense that you get that he has to kind of help him in, right? And at 130, I would think maybe you would need to be helped in. He had to be carried down from Canaan, so there's definitely a frailty there and a weakness there. Um, and Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many are the days of the years of your life?" Basically asked him, "How old are you?" I mean, it's obviously you're old. How old are you? Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my life, um, the days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning." And you go, well, wait a minute, he's 130. How can it be few and evil? Well, definitely been evil, and maybe the few part is joy that he's experienced in his 130 years. There hasn't been a lot, right? You just think about Jacob's past and all that he has gone through, with Esau, with Laban, with Leah, with his sons from Leah, and Joseph, and his mother dying, his father dying, losing Joseph, his wife, his cherished wife, Rachel, dying. He's had a lot of heartache in his life, and what's interesting is he comes in, and the first thing he does is um, he blesses Pharaoh, and this blessing for a guy who worked so hard to secure blessing for himself, he now becomes a blessing, which is an interesting reversal and a fulfillment of the promise that God made about in you all the nations will be blessed. And so here he is, the guy who worked so hard to get blessing and to gain. He's now the one giving blessing to Pharaoh, and a lot has probably been learned in Jacob's life, and I don't think we should discount that too much. That he has grown and learned a lot in his life, and now is the giver of blessing. And again, we see the fulfillment of that promise um, given to Abraham, to Isaac, and then to Jacob, that God will make them a great nation, and in all the nation, and through them all the nations will be blessed. And so verse 10, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. So he gives another blessing, and this is probably, could be a prayer of blessing on Pharaoh, and but he blesses him when he gets there, he blesses him when he leaves. Doesn't sound like there's a whole lot that happens there. Again, Jacob may have been pretty frail, and so Pharaoh, realizing that, this was probably just an opportunity to meet Jacob. And so um, it says then in verse 11, then Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt. Now, this is important. He gives them a possession. They have been given a land where to live. And because, again, that they are working for Pharaoh, their land is secure. They're being cared for, their food, everything is secure for them because it's tied up into Pharaoh, as they are in service of Pharaoh. And he gave them possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land of Ramses. So it's also known as the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with food according to the number of their dependents. And so there's the provision, there's the food given, and what really setting aside Jacob, Israel, and his descendants, setting them aside from whatever everything else that is about to go on in the land of Egypt. So, verse 13, now there was no food in all the land, for the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished by reason of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan in exchange for the grain that they bought. So you remember back the way this was set up, we take 1/5 of all the grain in the good 7 years, and then in the years of famine, the people will come and will purchase the grain. So essentially, they're purchasing the grain back, but it's been in held in check for them so that they have it. And some people see this as very shrewd and almost dishonest of Joseph, but he's really caring for the people, and he said it himself, God brought me here to preserve life. That's what he is doing. He's preserving life. And so what happens next, don't see it necessarily as um, Joseph taking advantage of these poor people. What Joseph is doing again is preserving life, blessing the land of Egypt ultimately. And Pharaoh is being blessed tremendously. So when the money was all spent in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? And notice there's no free handout here. And even in Israel, this was a practice that if a family fell on hard times, ultimately what it came down to was then they would offer themselves in service to whoever it was, and so there was no free handout. Um, so let's see. Why should we die before your eyes? For our money is gone. And Joseph answered, give your livestock, and I will give you food in exchange for your livestock if your money is gone. And what's probably happening here is that they would still care for the livestock. He's basically saying, mortgage your livestock. in still care for your livestock. We'll make sure they have food. Will you have food? Make sure you can care for your livestock. But now that livestock ultimately belongs to Pharaoh. So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the herds, and the donkeys. He supplied them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. So this took them through a whole nother year of famine. And when that year was ended, they came to him the following year and said to him, "We will not hide from my Lord that our money is all spent. The herds of our livestock are my Lord's. There's nothing left in the sight of my Lord but our bodies and our land." Notice now who makes this proposal, right? Um, Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food, and we with our land will be servants to Pharaoh, and give us seed that we may live and not die, that the land may not be desolate. So they're the ones offering themselves in service to Pharaoh. Their lands, they're mortgaging their lands. All they're asking for is give us seed so we can grow some crops, when we can grow crops, so that we can feed ourselves. So again, no free handouts. They are there saying, listen, we'll give ourselves to Pharaoh. Verse 20, so Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for all the Egyptians sold their fields because the famine was severe on them. The land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, he made servants of them from one end of Egypt to the other. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for the priests had a fixed allowance from Pharaoh and lived on the allowance that Pharaoh gave them. Therefore, they did not sell their land. Now you're going, well, wait a minute. If it was only the priests, what about Israel and the land in Goshen? Well, again, that was already government land, so that was not sold, in the sense that they were workers for Pharaoh, and so they were taken care of. Joseph said to the people, verse 23, behold, I have this day bought you and your land for Pharaoh. Now here is seed for you, and you shall sow the land. And at the harvests you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be your own, as seed for your field, and as food for yourselves and your households, and as food for your little ones. And they said, you have saved our lives. May it please my Lord, we will be servants to Pharaoh. So this isn't a horrible, begrudging kind of things. They're like, you've saved our life. We're happy to do this. And I'm making an assumption here and a guess here because we don't know. I'm assuming that the same thing would happen with the flocks, that they would give 1/5 and then would have the flocks to live on, as well as the grain in the land. So Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, and it stands to this day, that Pharaoh should have the fifth. The land of priests alone did not become Pharaoh's. So that became a statute, 20% tax on the land, and that to this day would be the writing of Genesis. And if you believe that Moses wrote Genesis, then it was that carried on for some 400 years. Now, I mentioned Israel before, and the fact that they do the same thing, that if the family gets destitute enough that they would mortgage their land and become servants of whoever is providing for them. But the difference in Israel as opposed to Egypt is that never changed in Egypt 400 plus years later, and it was still the same thing. In Israel, you have the year of Jubilee. Every 50 years, all the land and everything would be turned back to their rightful owners, and slaves would be freed along with their land. And so there was provision for that. Again, I think just this idea of there were no free handouts. It was, you made a way for yourself, whatever it took. Thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, verse 27, in the land of Goshen, and they gained possessions in it. Second time that that's mentioned, which again is a sign of importance. Um, and were fruitful and multiplied greatly. And now we begin to get the fulfillment of the promise of, I will make you a great nation. Now, that God making them a great nation didn't happen probably in the way that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob thought it would. It didn't happen in the land of Canaan. It happens in the land of Egypt when they were in servitude to Pharaoh. But God's promise, nonetheless, is coming true, that he's making them into a great nation. And we know that the story does not end here. So, um, thus, let's see. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the days of Jacob, the years of his life, were 147 years. And it's just interesting to note that Joseph, it's